Hey everyone, it's me, Gray, the DM for Puzzlebox. So, as most of you may know, Arc 1 of the campaign has been completed, and we are at least 10 sessions ahead of what's been released, which means that the party has made it back to the material plane and to the world at large. I thought it may be useful for you, the viewers, as well as my players, to have an audible telling of the general lore of the region and the world. I think it beats out making a text document pages long where you have to dedicate time and focus to absorbing it. Now, before I continue, let's note that all information given is what the players know as well as their characters. Nothing more, nothing less. So what they may know now may not be the full story. For those not already aware, this campaign is an experimental project where we are role-playing first-person amnesia. So, to describe briefly, the players offered me very few or no points of interest for their backstory, along with a detailed description of what their characters' personalities are. I then took these vague points and took heavy consideration of what the characters are like to make their backstories. The main feature of this campaign is that players have no clue what their backstories are, besides a small paragraph that I provided for them, so they wouldn't have absolutely nothing to go off of. They were also provided most, if not all, of the information I have told you already and am about to. An explanation further about how they get their memories back or anything of the like is not for this video, so if you want to know, please go watch the beginning of the campaign or join the Discord and take a look at the Arc 1 catch-up guide I made. So, yeah, here's the lore of the puzzle box. Roll title screen. As far as the timeline is concerned, let's start from the earliest known accounts of history. In a time that has become known as the Age of Oblivion, the planet had existed for thousands of years and societies flourished and collapsed as they were prone to do. However, at a certain nebulous point, it is pretty well established that a cosmic being of horrific variety came to the planet, attempting to consume all life. When this occurred, many people attempted to escape to other planes of existence for refuge, while others stayed to fight in vain and provide more time for others to escape. At the end of the day, the world population could do nothing. For reasons unknown, the Oblivion dissipated. There are many theories of what caused the Oblivion to arrive and leave. However, there is no widely accepted explanation. Some more attuned clerics and holy folk have even tried to ask their gods for the answer and were only told there was, quote, great cost. Regardless, when all was said and done, the planet ended up in shambles, dying in on its final glimpses of life. An eighth of the world's population remained alive, scattered amongst the planes of reality, and the planet had fractured, literally falling apart. From the rubble came the genesis of 2 new moons, making it a total of 3 around the dying planet. The gods attempted to breathe new life into the dead rock and repair the destruction, but nothing worked. The world had changed forever. There was this aura of chaotic energies that lingered, unbalanced, and out of control. The aura was so hostile and bizarre, it made the planet uninhabitable and dangerous for not only people, but the gods too. So what was the solution? Well, the gods discovered through some divine means that this energy born of the destruction and chaos could be controlled, in some sorts. All they needed was conduits for the energy to be focused into. And what better objects of this experiment than the new moons? They were far above the planet and away from the curious and often meddling hands of their creations. With that, the 2 new moons have since been called the Lady in Silver and the Lord in Gold, for the color of their now glowing surfaces. The Lady in Silver literally guides the energy associated with positivity, while the Lord in Gold does the same with the negative. After the moons were set in place as the conduits, the world reached a point of calm. The gods then repaired the planet and breathed life into it once more. The world was left to start anew, and some of those who had fled to the other planes returned. Now, there is no one known to be alive who remembers the Age of Oblivion, and much of it now has been left to interpretation. Many people have differing accounts of the details through their oral history, and the written accounts that have been discovered coincide in few aspects. However, most tend to agree the aforementioned to be the most consistent and probable. Now, a little over 1,300 years later, since the planet was rejuvenated, the world is currently in the Age of Rebirth, its namesake given for the fact the largest event was, well, the planet being reborn. Very clever. Also, here's the world calendar. Woo! Days are called suns, and months vary to astral and umbral. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, I know some of you have seen this somewhere before. I get it. I know. I thought it was cool. It sounded nice. Anyways, moving on. Oh, hey, remember those moons? Well, in the present day, once a month, the day varies month to month and year to year, each moon presents itself in the night sky and brings with it the power it controls. On Silver's night, she shines with a bluish silver radiance and breathes life into the world that bolsters the good and flourishes creation. On Gold's night, he shines with a reddish gold light that causes the land to recoil and become violent, bolstering monsters and the evil to great power. These phenomena occur because, like any filter, they have to be cleaned out as it was, so only so much can be held before some of it has to be released. Now, there is one night a year, known as the Night of Enchantment, that occurs on the last sun of the first umbral moon, where the two moons meet in the sky at the same time. Their energies balance out, and the combined light turns the sky and Earth into a purplish hue, where flecks of silver and gold dust-like particles fall from the sky. During this night, the moons can be seen briefly rotating around one another and exiting the night sky in the direction the other had come in. Meanwhile, all the nights of the year, the first moon of the planet, named the Guardian in White, remember how I said there were three, stands vigilant, orbiting the planet further away than silver and gold. Now, before I continue, let me tell you that the world is relatively new, and many are trying to establish, prosper, and progress. You may be wondering why this is important to mention, and that's because you should know there are not many exceptionally powerful people in the world. So there aren't clerics who can heal every wound and revive just anybody. There aren't crazy powerful wizards who know every arcane secret, and there are not warriors that have felled great enemies. There is a struggle of finding footholds in a fresh world where it's given natures to be dangerous. Not to mention that people have to contend with themselves as well. But enough of the grand scope, let's look smaller. The campaign takes place during the year 1346 PRB, post-rebirth, on the continent of Koren and in the southeastern region known as Eldarin. The oldest communities in the Age of Rebirth reside here, primarily in the Fairy Forest, which stretches along nearly 2/3 of the region. Within the forest, there are communities of the fairy folk, as well as those that coexist with the natural world. These people may have been the first in the region, but they were not the only ones for long. In the year 1225 PRB, all manner of people from other regions began to appear and settle in Eldarin. Drawn in by the promise of fresh territory, and then by whispers of grand places and power, people began arriving in droves. At first, the relations between the newcomers, also known as colonists, and the fairy folk, who are called elders by the colonists, were peaceful and they cooperated well. However, as years passed, tensions began to rise quickly. Notably, in 1251, the colonists settled within land claimed by fairy folk. That settlement was known as Honor. At first, the issues were localized, but as news spread, disdain went with it. Then came constant skirmishes between villages and communities along the borders of the fairy forest, from fairy folk and colonists alike. Both were seeking retribution in a horrifying cyclical scenario. These conflicts continued to escalate from 1251 all the way through the War of the Keepers. Now, the War of the Keepers was the all-out war between the fairy folk and the colonists that raged from 1275 to 1277 PRB. It was declared by the participants a war to see who would keep Eldarin for themselves and who would either have to leave, subjugate, or die. With the war's eventual end, however, there was no clear winner. The conflict fatigued grievances, emotions, and mental fortitudes. So, at a progressive summit, it was discussed that if they were to continue the fight, they would all more than likely see each other to a permanent end, leaving nothing but, quote, ruin akin to the oblivion in their wake, end quote. Peace was made when it was established the colonists would, firstly, never again attempt to settle or gather resources from within the fairy forest, and secondly, accept the fairy folk would be keeping a once colonist city, Thaumarin, while the fairy folk would firstly cease all violent actions against current established communities along the forest borders and the colonies at large, and secondly, would allow travelers passage through the fairy forest via a specific pathway. Both terms were agreed upon begrudgingly, but it was all for the best. What remains in the war's wake is a mostly peaceful region where old wounds still sometimes rear their ugly head in certain places, but where the largest threat is no longer each other. That honor, instead, is given to the world they inhabit. The region of Eldarin has changed a lot since the War of the Keepers, and that bit of history is far removed from our party, a whole 59 years for those who don't want to do the math for themselves. So, from here, let's look closer at the towns, cities, and relationships between them, as well as general places of note. Let's start with where our lovely group came out of the ground, the Golden Woodland. This place is seen as an extension of the fairy forest, and the people within call themselves fairy folk as well, despite being disconnected from the forest at large. There are a number of fairy folk communities and individual cultures within, though, that are more isolated than those to the north. Its most notable feature is the constant golden yellow leaves of the trees that make up its entirety. Think of them in close appearance to aspen trees. Now, when the War of the Keepers was raging, the fairy folk of the Golden Woodland did not participate, and neither did the colonist settlements of Bindarl and Vunir. These locales had an excellent relationship, and still do. They are one of the most remote places in the region, and came to appreciate one another. Though each felt a kinship to their respective northern peoples, they felt the conflict was not theirs. Thus, it was agreed upon that they would remain neutral during the war. This decision led to plenty of anger directed towards the people of this area for a long time, declaring them traitors and what have you. But they had each other, that being exactly what they wanted, and those volatile perceptions towards them eventually diminished. Given all this, after the war, Bindarl and Vunir declared themselves separate city-states from the colonies so as to no longer feel beholden to the rulers and cities that they had originated from many years ago. This was met with further mixed feelings by the colonies, but it wasn't like anyone was going to do anything about it, especially seeing how far away they were. Though Bindarl and Vunir remain separate city-states, they basically function as one and in excellent synergy with the Golden Woodland. Neither steps on each other's toes. Moving a little to the east is the first location the party visited, and that's Mulderport. Nothing ever bad happens in Mulderport. This place is a coastal township founded a few years after the War of the Keepers by a small group of merchant colonists who were tired of the backlash they had received during and after the war for doing business with fairy folk. The plan was to move as far south from the colonies as they could to start a port state, the idea being to provide themselves a place to live and work, free from judgment and ire, all with the hopes that, if their businesses were as valuable as they believed, people would come to them and request their goods to be shipped. And this gamble paid off. Mulderport served both the fairy folk and the colonists as a neutral trade hub during a time where direct relations were strained. Because of this, Mulderport has prospered and grown quickly. Today, the town is run by heads of commerce known as the Benefactors. Those leaders currently are Maxwell Zent, owner of the Silk Robe, Dolly Tash, Guildmaster of the Sailors Guild, Bren Mayer, Guildmaster of the Mercantile Guild, and Bell Ekro, owner of the Silver Platter. They make the decisions of law, economy, defenses, etc., you name it. All in all, they run a flourishing port town that makes quite a bit of coin and is a hub for all travelers. Moving to the north, we look at Pulpero, a community on the fringes of the Dark Rains Marsh. This place is an attempt by the inhabitants of the Dark Rains Marsh to have a town accessible to colonists and fairyfolk alike. The marsh is a dangerous place and not easily traversable by individuals unfamiliar with the terrain. So, desiring the benefits of centralized trade and community, many collected together to form Pulpero. The town itself is mostly a collection of huts, tents, and raised cabins scattered about a fairly large area. But the town center is walled off and acts as a gathering spot for travelers and a safe haven for citizens in case an attack befalls the town. As far as a hierarchy goes, there is a fluid system of a council of elders. Those who reach a certain age are welcomed onto the council, and their opinions and ideas hold significant weight in the town as such. So pretty much, you're on the council until you die, and can be as active or inactive as you want. There isn't an obligation. Looking a little to the northwest, there is Hilkadi and Filnay. The party knows very little of these places. The most they know is that they are fairyfolk settlements that were made in an attempt to have better outreach with the colonies for several reasons: trade, betterment of relations, mingling of cultures, those are the big ones. They accept any and all into their towns, but it's not entirely without prejudice. Residents who live through the War of the Keepers are understandably wary of colonists who come to town and stay. Sometimes old scars ache regardless. The only other information they have is that Inra is from Hilkadi. Now, west is Bannockburn. Well, currently Bannockburn. No one understands this place. The land it's on is considered cursed and haunted, as several settlements prior that had called the area home saw the inhabitants disappear without a trace. This recurring phenomenon has been going on for the past 3 years, where every year, after winter, the populace is gone. Knowing this, one would think people would stop going here, but people keep making the trek. Whenever would-be settlers are questioned as to why they are making the horrifying attempt, the questions are met with stonewalling and a simple phrase of, "I have my reasons." Let's look at Kelcheth. This is a relatively important town to the communities in the south of the region. The river it resides on, the Old Twin River, is wide enough for ships to get through, so it acts as a midway port. All the party knows at this point is that it's a theocracy that runs the place. 2 main beings are worshipped here as part of that: Kosuth, a primal of fire, and Astitia, a primal of water. This also allows me the chance to briefly explain at least the hierarchy of the gods. The chain of godly power goes top to bottom: greater deity, lesser deity, primordial or primal, then archfey, demigod, and whatever else. It's just a nice way to categorize the gods and quantify their powers / the extent of their dominion. Greater deities have a wide span of control and power and exist in the upper and lower planes. Lesser deities are mostly greater deities' children, trusted allies, or even people who came to great favor of a greater deity and were given immense power and responsibility. On the less common end, they are people who rose to divine status of their own volition. Primordials are beings who control the elements, simply. There are many primordials who lay claim over the same thing, but what makes them different is their perspectives and dogma. For example, fire primals can vary from destructive fiery sources, or rejuvenators expressing rebirth and healing power. Other divine beings from here are pretty self-explanatory, I think. Archfey, come on. Devils, we know. Angels, yeah. I could go on, but you guys get it. Anyways, with that out of the way, heading over to Honor. This place has a history of unrest. This town was a spark that lit the fire for the War of the Keepers, in case you forgot. It became a huge point of many battles, both literally and by principle, kind of like the Alamo. You remember that, right? Anyways, somehow it survived and stayed in colonist possession to this day. Throughout the war, buildings, walls, and fortifications were built, destroyed, and built again, all in an active war zone. Now, during the peace talks, it was agreed Honor would remain inhabited since many people had died to keep it standing. It was seen to be a dishonor to the memories of those individuals if it were abandoned and razed. But there was a caveat. The original route that connected it to the rest of the colonies, seen here, which cut through the forest, was to be abandoned, and the colonists would have to forge a new one. On most maps, the forbidden route is still marked. However, all experienced travelers know better than to step foot on these grounds. Okay, from here, to keep it simple and not drone on for too long, let's clump together some places. East Branch Fort and Houndspell have the same basic function. They are stopping points for people leaving and entering Eldarin, and they are quite capable of defending themselves. Both locales are armed and manned by soldiers of Harkenstrom and Argenstead, as well as the Harkenstrom Guides. The Guides are the assigned bodyguards and survivalists for travelers who take the pathway through the fairy forest marked here. Now, remember that pathway from the War of the Keepers peace agreement that I mentioned a couple minutes ago? The route designated to be the only allowed path through the forest? Yeah, that's it. Now, why was this path necessary? Well, because Thaumarin. That will be explained in a bit. Ulsterset, Timbermoor, Marin's Eve, Farnos, and Pavenport all fall within the claim of Harkenstrom and are considered part of their kingdom, while Stillshore and Ferrobane fall within Argenstead's territory. Each has their own local leadership, but you all know how that stuff goes. This, I think, is also a good time to explain that this map you're looking at does not show every location. There are plenty of small villages and landmarks spread among this region that the party may come across. Not everything has been discovered or mapped out. Now, out of all the places mentioned, Marin's Eve is one that has a little extra flavor. It's a town built just west of the final battle site for the War of the Keepers. As the story of the battle goes, the second in command of the colonist army, an Aasimar paladin named Marin Atro, had been tasked with stopping the mobilized elders who had recently conquered the city of Thaumarin. She had been known for fighting with only shields and never taking a life. This act earned her the respect of both sides. The battle was a 3-day long and bloody conflict where everyone showed their exhaustion but no sign of giving in. On the third day of battle, Marin had enough. She requested a secret meeting with the fairy folk leadership to broker a chance at a peace agreement. Ultimately, through her reputation and her desire to prevent further bloodshed, she earned their trust just enough, and they agreed to meet with the colonist leaders to discuss peace. This action was the catalyst to the end of the war and why the town has her namesake. Backtracking a tad, let's look at Etowah. It resides on the fringes of the Black Hollow Wood, which is considered to be so cursed and haunted that no one dares enter. This, however, made the region very attractive to certain individuals who might benefit from the isolation. Fearless adventurers, criminals in hiding, glory-seeking warriors, or monster hunters, for example. Etowah is essentially the safe haven for those individuals, as it was founded by those individuals. So it is well protected and more than ready to fight off whatever they deem a threat. Because of this community's history and culture, the people of the town have a reputation of being quite the unsavory type. Next up, we have the big important places in the region. Arkengarden, Argenstead, Thaumarin, Harkenstrom, and Tyrannus, all the way over there. Starting with Arkengarden, it is known as the City of Gears because of most of its population being automatons. Outsiders of the city only know that of the fleshy, organic types of people in the city, there are craftsmen of all varieties, most notably tinkerers and inventors. The common consensus is that all the automatons were made by those people in large quantities. Others who claim to have heard tales from those who have lived there say Arkengarden was founded by those who had escaped the oblivion to the plane of Mechanus and returned to the material plane alongside their mechanical overseers. Either is a viable origin as far as anyone is concerned, but it is worth noting Arkengarden was in Eldarin before the colonists arrived, and the fairy folk seemingly had little to no contact with the city prior to colonist arrival. It should be mentioned that it's very hard to get into the city. Historically, it's been demonstrated to take a long time to be allowed in. Even ships that make deliveries are only allowed at the docks outside the city. Moving to Arkenstead, it is one of the first colonist settlements that survived over the years and grew to the city it is today. It is a pretty run-of-the-mill coastal city, a hub for trade, etc., etc. But what makes it special is that it houses a substantial arcane academy called Arcana Volspar. The school is considered to be the prime location to attend for any future arcane practitioner. If you have the cash, that is. Why is it so prestigious? Well, Arkenstead is a magocracy, meaning its government is run by mages who are quite skilled, and it just so happens those same mages are the educators at Arcana Volspar. Now, scooting the focus down to Harkenstrom, it is like Arkenstead in a lot of ways. One of the first colonist settlements, coastal city, trade hub, yeah, you heard this 30 seconds ago. Now, like Arkenstead, there is also an arcane academy in Harkenstrom, but not run by a magocracy. Arcana Ordis is still a prestigious establishment, but not as big and not strictly for those who are required to learn arcane formulas. Those with innate magical tendencies, such as sorcerers and eldritch knights, can attend and do. With that in mind as well, Harkenstrom puts more of a focus on its temples and other such places to assist in the teaching and training of clerics and paladins of many denominations. However, to most people's surprise, Harkenstrom is not a pseudo-theocracy, at least not anymore. Up next, Thaumarin. From the top. This city is actually the first permanent larger settlement to have been formed by the colonists. Early in its history, Thaumarin, formerly known as East Haven, was well known for being the first major stop for weary travelers who sought rest and supplies before the next leg of their journey into Eldarin. Being a famous frontier town caused it to boom quickly and form into the city it is today. However, it is no longer seen as the first stop of Eldarin, as it used to be. During the War of the Keepers, the city was taken by the fairy folk, renamed Thaumarin, and continues to be in their possession. As a message to the colonists, as well as a continued warning, Thaumarin has turned away all but fairy folk since their claiming of the city. The meaning of this action is to tell all residing and arriving in Eldarin that fairy folk homes are not to be taken and they are not welcome in their territory unless given the privilege. They cannot simply walk in. Thaumarin is the perfect example of a major landmark that the players know nothing of. None have memories of this place, and none were born there. So, to reiterate, most information is not known to them. What has been said is the most basic and common. Alright, last stop on the list. Tyrannus is a towering citadel within the Earthen Maw Mountains, residing in a large valley. This locale is most known for being the home of the Order of Dragon Knights and the Order of Drake Wardens, as well as being one of the few major monuments to have survived the Age of Oblivion. After the rebirth, the few Dragon Knights that survived the Oblivion returned to Tyrannus and made it their duty to reinforce their ranks, so to avoid extinction of their culture. And during this time of reconstruction, the Drake Wardens formed amidst their ranks. The Dragon Knights and Drake Wardens have been a defending force in the region long before the colonists arrived and are a culture that predates the Age of Oblivion. As a whole, they are an independent, militaristic society owing allegiance to their respective orders. The Order of Dragon Knights and the Order of Drake Wardens both are based in Tyrannus, where they work hand in hand and have a strong loyalty to one another. Their aim is to protect the region unbiasedly in times of danger and from the roaming beasts and monsters that were sent back into the world after the rebirth. And as a quick aside, they primarily do not get involved in political conflicts unless things very clearly get out of hand. In recent history, Tyrannus has been used as a prison for most of the dangerous criminals within the region. The colonists and fairy folk alike would prefer those types of individuals be placed in a secure location surrounded by powerful people than be stuck with them in their own prisons. Now, I'm sure you might be saying,
Gray, there's a literal Dragon Knight in the party. What? That's all you have to say?
Yes, for now. That Dragon Knight has more information, but that is for them to share and is specific to their character. not for the world of Eldarin at large, and not for the other characters who are uninvolved in Dragon Knight society. So, when that info pops up, you'll know. Think of it as a spoiler, because some of it literally is. You also might be saying,
Gray, there are other named places on the map. Why you not talk about them?
because the party doesn't know or remember info about them. That's basically it. So anything learned about those places, they will find out in-game. Not to mention, you guys, the wonderful viewers, are learning the world with them. You're experiencing their amnesia as well, so when shocking information or interesting turns take place, you'll have that same excitement and shock as they will. That being said, stick around for those. But for now, I think I'm done here. So everyone, I hope you enjoyed and feel informed. Time for me to take off my teaching attire. So have a good day, have a good night, and good luck.